guys, so I don't think I have actually come on camera and spoken since Monday, maybe, since I filmed the outro for my other reading vlog. But reading has been happening, and I'm really happy this week because I don't feel like I'm reading shit books, basically, so I feel much happier. So one of the books I want to talk about is this, I Am Not Your Baby Mother by Candice Braithwaite. I really like this book so far. I really love it. So what do I want to say about this book? I'm on page 89. I really like it. So far she's talking about her experience of growing up at home. Candice is from Barbados. And it's just really nice what she's spoken about so far. She talks about the bluest line of, finding out she's pregnant. That's the title of the first chapter. The second one is called Desmond, which I think is the name of a TV show that she liked that had really positive like role models. I don't feel like that's the name of her dad, but in that she sort of talks about her upbringing, so sort of going between her nan and her granddad's house and her mum's house, and what that was like and how cared for she was sort of at her nan and granddad's house, but talking about just how multifaceted they were as a person. Like, this book I really like, because I feel like sometimes when people have books, when people have memoirs, or obviously in a lot of fiction books as well, people talk about characters as if they're just one singular thing, like that person is good and in all facets of their life they're good. And it's like, obviously the human experience is so different. Not everyone is going to see that person as good, or they might see them as good and feel like still really irritated by the fact that they're good. And what I think Candice manages to get across really well in this book, I think, is how layered her family was, just as people are. She talks about her granddad and her nan, and how, like, I think her granddad had an accident, which meant that actually he couldn't work, and he very much stayed at home and looked after her. But he was very house proud. He knew how to cook. He, was always the one cleaning the house. And the nan was the one who sort of worked, budgeted, and all these sorts of things. So she talks about those qualities of them. But then, like, later you get these qualities of her granddad, schooling her, sort of like making her practice things for school, but then just all the kind things he would say to her. And later she grows up in the story as well, she talks about sort of his flaws and like her grandma's flaws as well. And I just like it just makes people seem so like well-rounded, because that is how people are. They're not one or the other, they're a mixture of both. And I don't know, I feel like she really manages to do that really well in this book. And she's talking about, there's a chapter called Secure the Baby Bag, where she's talking, I guess, about her and her boyfriend at the time, and like getting bits to the baby. And I just really like it. There's a bit in here that she writes that I just like, I felt it, because this is exactly like how I feel. And this is, well, I don't know what chapter this is in, but anyway, she says she's talking about motherhood and all the things that are going to come up, and she says here, instead I wanted to daydream about perhaps being the best mother possible, one who was more inclined to remind their offspring that I was their parent and not one of their little friends, a mother they could ask countless favours from or borrow money from, a mother who would be in a position to offer up career advice instead of having to encourage the keeping of a mediocre job to help top up the electric meter, a mother that could get their child on the property ladder before they turned 30. Shit, one could dream. I just love that, because that resonates so hard with me. Like, I want to be all those things as a mother, because I never got that, and that's obviously different circumstances. My mum couldn't do that for me, but there is something in there. And she does talk about the sort of generation that, like, I guess me and her are from. I think she is slightly older than me, but we can still be from the same generation. But that sort of level of access, essentially, the level of access that actually I think a lot of second gen children find themselves up against when they go to schools and go to workplaces where people their same age, and typically it will be their white counterparts, have a level of like access to other things that they just never got. That's financial freedom, that's having parents, encourage you to save and getting you on the property ladder, and just little things that, parents that you can call who drop everything and come and get you and things like that. It was just something I resonated hard with. So a lot of this is definitely a lot of personal feeling. One thing I have noted in the book is sometimes I feel, and I put here, there are a lot of points being started and hardly finished. A lot of the times topics start and then it moves on to something else, and I'm like, I don't really know why you said that, because you just put like 2 lines on that and then we've jumped into something completely different. And again, sometimes feel a bit tenuous, but I'm not annoyed by it, but it is just something that I have noticed on page 55. There's a talk of like sexual assault in here, and she talks also about how how perhaps like Caribbean and African parents sort of parent their children in a way that makes it so hard to like share things with them. Here she's talking about sort of growing up and realizing like the power you have in your sex as a woman anyway. The problem is, when you have this combined with a general reluctance to share with your carers how the challenging the problem is, when you have this combined with a general reluctance to share with your carers how the challenges that come with your new reality now affect you, there is a lot that can slip beneath the radar, and of course there are things that can just be buried, including sexual assault. And essentially what she's talking about is the fact that a lot of people raise their kids to be like, oh, hide this away, you know, that weird uncle's coming around in stairs and stuff like that, but don't give girls, as in this case I'm usually talking about, but probably also men, the space to actually talk about what, you know, developing boobs mean, what sort of, you know, attraction means, and just a good space to talk about that, you know, so you don't feel ashamed about that, so that in the case of if there is things like sexual assault, you do feel like you can come to your parents because it's not a shameful thing. So honestly, she's just ticking so many boxes for me in terms of what she's talking about. One of the funniest bits I read in here was about a pram that she wanted, which is something called a bugaboo. I'm pretty sure my friend had this, but at the time when she was talking about being pregnant, I was paying attention to her talking about being pregnant, but not about the pram and stuff like that, because I don't know anything about these things. But she talks about this pram that's like £1,000, and she told her boyfriend at the time, who I assume is now her husband, and he says he's Nigerian, and he says, oh yeah, are they mad? Come on now, will the pushchair get the baby into Oxford as well? I beg, just carry the baby on your back until it can walk. And it just made me laugh. I had to message my friend and be like, don't you have a bugaboo? Did that cost you £1,000? So yes, but in that scenario, she's talking about the fact that she went to go and get the pram on this lady for a good bargain of £250, which she bartered to 210, and the sort of racial prejudice that she faced there. The woman was just so taken aback that it was like a black woman that had come to get it, and yeah, she just acted like many people do when they see black people and just think they're about to rob their home, despite the fact having never robbed anyone in their life. So yes, I'm really enjoying that. I actually forgot to say last week as well, I'm actually listening to an audiobook as well. That is a non-fiction book, and that is Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism by Bell Hooks. I see everyone talk about Bell Hooks, and I want to know what some of her knowledge is. I've listened to quite a good chunk of it, and I'm actually really enjoying it. Mainly what it is talking about, though, is slavery in America and sort of black women and black men and how they were treated there, and just talking so much about it. It's so frustrating to see how ridiculous the patriarchy can be. You know, that actually white men were willing to allow black men who they, you know, when they didn't see black people as anything, have the right to vote, rather than have white women even have the right to vote. Like, they hate women that much. And that is why when people always going on about black women and whatnot, I'm like, you have to understand that, it literally goes white men, black men, white women, black women. We are bottom of the barrel in what people think about, because they consider women as less. Think about the way they think about black people and being a woman. Like, it is just so in there that it's just so entirely frustrating. And what I like as well, what she's doing here, is also talking about the societal changes that were happening in terms of the perception of women at that time, and also what white women were sort of made to endure, I suppose, and, you know, what readings and stuff they would have. It's mainly coming from the Bible that was sort of telling them about the way they were supposed to be, and I think she encompasses it so well, not in a way to do it so that you feel sorry for white women, but in a way to understand what was happening in society. And I think that is key. Like, I don't know what the rest of the chapter is going to be like. She might just be turn around and be like, they're still annoying, but she very much talks about, you know, what was affecting them and how society saw them and how men saw them. It's all very, very, very interesting. This is actually a book I want to buy so I can underline a lot of things. But honestly, like, hearing things about slavery and the way they beat people and stuff like that, like, I made a conscious effort, like, in the past couple of years to stop reading books like that and not see films and stuff like that, because there's just too much of it. And I think, like, you read about it, I know it happened. There's no need for me to keep reliving it, because that's just so painful, I think, especially, like, as a black person, to keep having to know how much people hated people with your skin colour. I'm not going to keep doing that to myself. But yeah, there's a lot of that in there. I don't find it too bad, because actually I haven't frequently read books that do that. But yeah, I'm really enjoying my non-fiction reading. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do for the rest of the evening, but I'm going to pack my filming stuff away, maybe do a bit of editing, and then I'll check in with you guys later. Bye! Okay, take two. It's really dark in here. Sorry about that. Hopefully I can edit that post. I can edit that post filming. But yes, what I was saying was I finished this book and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I will talk about that more probably just in my wrap up. Otherwise, these videos would be just a bit redundant for you. But honestly, I found this so insightful. I think actually the way it's told is one of the best ways, it's one of the best things about this book really, and obviously the topic that she's talking about, because it very much is weaving in personal with some of the sort of societal, I guess, attitudes towards black women. And what I really like what she does in this book is a lot of the topics she touches on are just very personal to her, which obviously then feed on into other wider topics. So, for example, one of the topics that she talks about in this book is when after she had her baby, actually, something very serious happened to her. And, you know, this isn't the kind of book that you can spoil per se, but I don't think I'll mention it. Maybe I'll mention it in my wrap-up, I'm not sure. But she talks about her experience, you know, after birth, and just feeling that something wasn't right and not being listened to something of that, such a huge and horrible thing happening to her, and the sort of fallout of that. And that is very much linked to the sort of thought behind the fact that black women, you know, bear a lot of pain and things like that, so people just not really listening to her. And even after, you know, this horrible thing happens to her and she has her surgery and doctors are coming around, she's still being like mistreated by doctors who are just prodding her and being like, oh, come on now, like, you've had a baby, like, this is nothing. I think it actually ties in so nicely because I'm listening to also Bell Hooks' Ain't I a Woman, and she talks a lot about where that sort of attitude has come from. But anyway, I digress. One of the things that so she does a lot of that is obviously weaving in personal sort of stories, so it does follow a sort of linear path of like things that have happened in her life and how these things actually are quite commonplace in society. So then one of the other things that she does really nicely here is talk about Beyonce and Serena Williams, but I mean it's just a very small paragraph like this, but she says, you know, and with superstars like Beyonce and Serena Williams also expressing their experience of such mistreatment, albeit in America, I think it's pertinent to note that money doesn't erase your blackness. There are stereotypical tropes in place that continue to be perpetuated and silence those being targeted. And then there's another really interesting bit where she talks about depression, and she talks about like her mum and depression, but she also talks about the fact that, like, from where she could see in terms of what motherhood, she says here, the only thing I knew about being a mother was that it could send you mad. And relates and starts talking also about her mum, but also talks about other kids that she knew at school and their parents who had been sectioned or had depression, and this is obviously black women commenting on that. So I really do like how she takes it from the personal into such wider topics, and she does that throughout the whole book, and I really, really like it. What I also liked about this book was how like current it felt. So this book obviously I think was published halfway through this year. At the end of the book she talks about the passing away of a Instagram mother, breathlessly mothering, that's it. I think I've seen her post around like when people sort of share it to their stories and stuff like that, and I was aware of her passing away. She talks about how she was friends with her because what Candice Braithwaite did was create this thing called Make Motherhood Diverse. I think she created it along with someone else, and that was really about making motherhood, I think initially actually her purpose was to make motherhood diverse for black women, but actually upon doing that she realised how, like, I guess how much she didn't include other bits of diversity. So obviously same-sex relationships, mothers who were disabled, mothers with chronic illnesses. So, and I think breathlessly mothering was one of the people with a chronic illness. But she also talks about another thing that went down, which I'd heard about, but because I'm not part of that world, I wasn't really like that into it. But it was to do with I think it's like Mummy of 4 or something. She is a mum of like I think 4 kids, and also then her husband has an Instagram where I think they're 4 daughters, I think. And actually this woman was an NHS midwife, and also she had a podcast, and Candice has been on her podcast before talking about motherhood and things like that. But it came out that this woman was basically frequenting a forum site and was basically bitching about Candice and saying things like she uses her race as a weapon, so it shuts down any conversation. This is after having Candice on her podcast. So I remember reading about this and everyone going wild. But again, I don't frequent mummy Instagram and things like that. Like, I follow a couple of people who do have kids and stuff like that. But I just was quite struck by how topical it was. And actually reading this book, I like, you can't imagine really when something like this is happening how the other person feels. You probably imagine they feel rage, they feel really horrified, but actually reading this really opened your eyes to actually the level of pain that Candice would have experienced from all of this, because she says actually since it happened she hasn't really touched on it, and in this book she does touch on it, and she doesn't touch on it for very long. Like, fair play to her, I think she's really concise with her words. But you see the damage that is done to someone like Candice and to black women in general, where you think you have supporters, but actually behind your back, this is what they're saying. Even the ones that are standing up in public and saying they believe you, actually just think that you're chatting shit and that, you know, as black women, you should be quiet. And I think that pain is probably, I don't know if it's worse to someone who is directly opposing you, but at least you know where that person stands. And I think it's probably harder for Candice because she is a content creator. She does, I guess, work in a world where actually white women dominate, and it's a bit like, how do you go about making sure you always trust people and that they always have your back, and that actually in the back of their head they're not actually thinking that. Another thing she does touch on in here, which I also really liked, was about her transition from working at a publisher. I think she said she was either doing marketing, she was doing marketing, to then deciding to become a content creator. And I like the fact that she talked about it quite openly, because I know like a lot of content creators actually just sort of transition. They were doing this as a sort of side hobby and then it happened, you know, like the ones from like back in the day. But actually I liked her talk about how realistic it was, how she saw that, you know, other people were doing this and she was like, why can't I do it? And she did it. So I really enjoy that. We'll talk about more of why I gave it 4 out of 5 stars in my wrap up. But honestly, guys, one of my top books of 2020. Well, hello there, people. Honestly, finding lighting in this flat that isn't so dark is a bloody miracle. Obviously, daylight savings and all of that plays a big part. And obviously, Scotland is just kind of dark a lot of the times. But I wanted to talk to you about this book and sort of round off this reading vlog, because I'm about to start another one, I suppose. But I read some of this last night. I read a chapter last night, and I'm so surprised by the switch in, I guess it has to be myself, because I don't think the writing has changed that much, but I found it so much easier to get through. I understood so much of what was happening. So the chapter that I read is cultural nationalism. I understood so much of what he was talking about and the context he was placing it in. I honestly really enjoyed it. I said to myself, you know, just read a chapter and then, you know, you'll be done for the night. But I actually ended up reading like a little bit of the next chapter because I enjoyed it so much. And then the next chapter is blackness. So the chapter basically, it talks about cultural nationalism, but he basically, as he says here, presents a detailed critique of nationalism. He says, the chapter will make it clear the distinction between its regressive ideals and the politics of black radicalism. And then he says, before doing this, we need to consider what makes cultural nationalism so popular. And what he really talks about here is basically Malcolm X, but also the Nation of Islam. And I didn't really know much about the Nation of Islam, but I'm very shocked by like what I found and sort of, I guess, the reason why sort of Malcolm X broke away from it. But yes, he very much talks about how a lot of these get started and how, in essence, I can't remember which one he called a cult, but basically a lot of them do not ever directly tackle the issues that, you know, we as black people face in, you know, either in Africa or the diaspora. He makes some really interesting points, and he's talking about sort of the sort of, I wouldn't say return to Africa, but the centeringness of Africanness in black culture. He says here, cultural nationalism emerged to fill this void, the absence of African culture in black life. In order to become whole again, Afrocentrism is the most developed and popular paradigm. And essentially he's talking about the fact that a lot of people see us, you know, us black people, embracing Africa as sort of the source and the answer to a lot of these things, when that isn't the case. And I think in the next chapter he's going to talk about sort of, where I think the chapter is called Blackness, where he's going to talk about blackness more, and I guess talk about more about that. But throughout the chapter he makes really good points. Like he says that Africa has not been spared the cultural genocide, because, you know, in Africa there's still high levels of bleaching. So he's basically saying, you know, the answer isn't that everyone needs to basically reclaim their roots and become African. That's not the answer here. And I found it very interesting because these are not really arguments that I've heard fully fleshed out before. And it says, he probably says it more specifically here, where he says the problem with negritude or Afrocentrism is not the idea of reclaiming African culture, which is clearly important given the extent of cultural genocide, The problem is that it presents reclaiming our culture as an endpoint to liberation itself. And I thought that was actually quite important, because actually it's not a case of, right, okay, we're all African, that sort of eradicates any of the issues we face. That's not really what's going to help it. So I thought that was very interesting. He goes on here to talk about civic religion. He talks about, you know, religion being brought into Africa, but then just the sort of progress that has made, I would say. And it's in here that he talks specifically about Nation of Islam, where he says it's one of the best examples of a civic religion. And he goes on to explain sort of why. And I found that very interesting about the Nation of Islam. And it's very interesting because one of the points that he says here, for all its blood and damnation rhetoric towards white people, the reality is that the Nation of Islam had a history of collaborating with police and state forces to keep order in black communities. There is a reason why Malcolm was assassinated, while Farrakhan is allowed to retain his pulpit even today. Once we accept religion as the solution to the problem of racism, we have lost the battle. Very interesting stuff about the Nation of Islam, I will have to say. And he goes on to say that, you know, he's not to critique any religion or culture, and, you know, there's many different routes to blackness, to the politics of liberation, and they can all play a part in black radical becoming, but they should never be confused with black radicalism itself. And to me, this is all brand new. Like, I'm not someone who knows this. And he sort of ends that bit saying here, culture is crucial to revolution, but it is not the revolution. And I was just like, wow, good stuff, like, you know. So honestly, a lot of it is just clicking with me, like I'm understanding what he's saying. So I'm actually really enjoying this so much, which is an interesting turn of events. So I'm not going to say really any more about this, because otherwise I will be doing a chapter by chapter analysis. Because I finished I Am Not Your Baby Mother, I'm now going to go on and read this book. I think this will be sort of the final book that I read. It's got some coffee stains on it. Oh dear. I'm going to read this book, but I think I will talk about that in the next vlog and just end this video here, because I don't know how long this video is going, but I'll edit it and then I'll see. Thank you guys so much for watching this reading vlog. I hope it's been interesting, and definitely, yeah, in the next one I'll be speaking about this book and obviously more about the Bell Hooks one, because it's really, really good. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. Bye.